Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast, and this is an extra special episode. We actually have, I don't know if Gregory Wright remembers, but he's actually returning to the show. He's been on here before. This instance, what we're going to be doing tonight is we are going to be grilling Gregory Wright with some questions about, that's right, Punisher No Escape, dropped in 1990. That's right, 1990. First off, welcome back to the show, Gregory Wright. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a blast.
This is, as if you couldn't tell, this is one of my favorite characters. The Punisher captivated my mind as a child and,
That
continued.
Why you're warped.
I dressed up for the occasion tonight. Dressed up, put on a new hat and everything because I was just so excited we get to talk about somebody who got to write this character. Dean, I want to turn it over to you. You're going to drive this Q&A. I've got questions. Darry's got questions, but Dean, I'm turning it over to you.
All right. I'm Dean Compton, running the Unspoken Decade. It's always great to talk to Gregory Wright. I guess where we should start, we were talking a little bit before we started about your predilection for food these days. You do a lot of cooking, a lot of that kind of stuff. What do you think that microchip was missing when he goes into the convenience store? He's looking for zingers, choco bombs. What would you get in the convenience store, Gregory? Would you even go to a convenience store these days?
Yes. I like to eat the crappy food and the white trashy stuff as much as anybody.
Well, that's good. Because that's
so
all
it is funny. When I go to the convenience stores, you probably catch me getting some Slim Jims. I tend to like those combos that like the pizza flavored combos. I like those quite a bit. And then if I find the tasty cake section, I try every little tasty cake thing that ever came out. But I really like the crimpets.
Nice.
Yeah, I like to go into and I got to get myself a Coke. So one of my foodie friends and I kept sort of joking around at making redneck risotto, in which instead of wine with the rice, we'd start off with some crappy beer with the rice. And then we would use some like Slim Jims and squirt that's cheese in a can.
Oh, yeah.
See what happens. I just haven't made it yet. I really should because it seems like it will taste good. It just won't taste like risotto.
Right. You'll have to wash it down with a redneck margarita. You ever have one of those?
No, what is it?
It's where it's tequila and Mountain Dew. So you'll be.
Oh, that would be good. I mean, tequila. How do you go wrong with that?
Right. I want to start with this book. Was it something that you pitched where you approached about a Punisher project? Punisher Super Hot 1990. They're doing a lot of Punisher OGNs at the time, which is where this winds up. Was this just an original idea you had floating around, or were you hearing, hey, we're looking for Punisher stuff? Let me get in on that.
Okay. This is actually a really fun story that has a whole bunch of other fun stories connected to it. At one point, Marvel was in dire need of just putting out more product that they knew would sell. If it was the Punisher or Spider-Man or the X-Men, the marketing department, they could sell that. Didn't matter who did it or whatever. They needed product. So Tom DeFalco had come to Don Daly, who was the Punisher editor at the time, and he says, I need a Punisher product now. And Don said, hey, okay, that's a great idea. And at the time, Jim Lee was actually visiting New York for a few months. And Jim and I happened to be in the office. And Don decides that, because Carl Potts, Jim Lee, and I were the team on the Punisher War Journal at the time.
Right.
Don, for whatever reason, decides he wants Carl, Jim, and I to co-plot a 48-page Punisher story and do it. Now, of course, I'm thrilled to be included in the writing part of the Punisher. And Jim is thrilled because he's been co-plotting with Carl. And Jim and I had been talking about an idea we had anyway. But Carl Potts said, I don't think that's a very smart idea because having three different people kind of trying to write the same story, you're just asking for trouble. You really don't want three people to do it. And before Carl could sort of argue his point anymore, Jim pipes up and he says, I got an idea. Why don't I do one with Greg that we're already talking about, and then I'll do another one with Carl. So now Don's, I get two projects. And Marvel immediately went, sure, without ever hearing what those two projects were, because Jim Lee.
Right. And the Punisher.
Jim Lee and the Punisher. I had this idea with Nick Fury and the Punisher, which was going to be, I can't remember the name of it.
Rules of the Game?
Yeah, Rules of the Game, which we retitled Operation Blackheart at one point. And Carl had an idea with the Punisher and this character you've probably never heard of named Wolverine.
Very obscure.
So, Jim and I sat down and like 3 days, plotted what became rules of the game, except for it wasn't going to fit in a 48-page special. So I went to Tom DeFalco and I sort of pitched the story that Jim and I had come up with. And Tom looks up at me and he goes, okay, you can do it as a 64-page hardcover painted graphic novel that I was going to do blue line painted colors on it, which was not what I was expecting. We were just kind of hoping to be able to do a 64-page special. And I was like, wow. So I ran back. I told Jim, and Jim was like, that's awesome. And Don was like, oh, hey, that's great. Let's do it. The only problem was that meant this was going to take longer than what Don had to get another project out. So Don panicked. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I have another idea. Now, the funny part of this is my other idea was the same idea, because the Punisher rules of the game was essentially Punisher and Nick Fury are going after the same guy for different reasons. That was the initial pitch for that. Two people going after the same person for different reasons. While I had been doing that, I kind of had thought, well, what if the Punisher was the guy two other people were going after, which No Escape is essentially the same pitch. I got two guys going after the Punisher for completely different reasons. But I didn't put it like that to Don. I just said, I really like US Agent and Paladin. I said, what if the two of them are trying to bring the Punisher in while the Punisher's trying to solve a cartel problem? And he goes, yeah, that's great. He goes, who's going to draw it? And I said, well, let me call. So I had been looking at Vigilante at DC, and I'd really liked the artist Todd Smith. So I'd wanted to do something with him. So I called him up and I said, well, I got this project. I said, we got to do it fast. And Todd was like, great, I'd love to do a Punisher project. So we got him on board. And then we decided we'd get Danny Bullinati involved because Danny could ink super fast. We knew we were going to have to bang this thing out really fast. And Ken Lopez was in the bullpen, and he was happy to get some freelance work. So we had somebody right there at Marvel to do the work. And then I was brought in to color it. And we had to do the book so fast that I actually had to bring in my friend Steve White, who used to color RoboCop for me when I was editing that, to help me color No Escape, because you can kind of see it towards the end. Todd was moving a little faster, and then Danny had to move a little bit faster. And then we had we probably did that book about 3 times as fast as it was supposed to get done. That's how I wound up doing that project, so that it bought us time for Rules of the Game, which never got done, as you well know. And
right.
Jim, of course, begged off of doing Carl's project, which didn't thrill Carl so much. And then when I left staff, Carl didn't want Don editing his project. I wound up with that project to edit freelance, which I hired Mark Silvestri to do this Wolverine Punisher project. So that would have been great.
Sure.
And then Mark did about 5 or 6 pages, and then that was the end of that. Then we wound up getting Gary.
I wonder what happened.
I think it was too much, and I think that was when the Image stuff was starting to happen. Right. I'm not sure if the timing was about right or not. Then we got Gary Erskine to do it, and I was not on staff. So it wound up going from being a 48-pager to, I think, a 4-issue series. I think it was called Damaging. Was it called Damaging Evidence?
Yes, Damaging Evidence.
Damaging Evidence.
Yep.
I had Marie Javins, who's now the big wig at DC. She colored it. So yeah, this little project got done very quickly, so to buy us time for a book that Jim Lee never finished. And it's really a shame, because the Rules of the Game is really, it's terrific stuff, and some of Jim's best art that no one will ever see except for like the little bits that got out. So that's how it got going. And then I begged Don. I said, "Can we get Joe Jusko to do the cover?"
Yes.
Joe's a buddy of mine. He goes, "Well, nice. I don't know if he'll do it." So I called Joe and I said, "Joe, you want to do a quick Punisher cover?" So he agreed to do it. So if nothing else, this was a good excuse for me to have Joe Jusko paint a cover of something that I wrote.
Sure.
Now, honestly, this sounds like it might be the easiest editing job that Don Daly ever did. You were making all the connections, talking to all the people, doing all the pitches.
Yes.
I'm not trying to knock him. Don't get me wrong, but you did a lot of the heavy lifting here.
I think I did the same thing kind of on Deathlock. I got Butch Geist and Scott Williams involved, and then I wound up getting the other colorists involved, and I brought Richard Starkings in. Any project that I was involved in when I was still on staff, I tended to probably involve myself more than I should have. But Don didn't mind, because that was less work for him. He was thrilled that I got somebody as good as Todd Smith, and we just sort of banged that project out for him, and it did quite well for him. So he was a happy camper.
Yeah, Proofs in the Pudding is a fantastic piece of work. Darry, Wade, I know you're itching over there. You probably got a question or two. Let me just turn it over to you real quick.
This was the first time I'd ever read this, and I enjoyed it a great deal. It came out just before I started reading comics, so I feel like I missed out on something that I would have loved as a kid. I just want to ask, I'm a huge US Agent fan, and I thought you did such a great job at making him like a three-dimensional, really interesting character here. What is the deal with the commission? Why are they interested in Frank? Is that a story you had planned out for maybe a follow-up story and never got to? Or I'm just curious, what was going on there?
Yes, at one point, I think when Mike Barron was leading the Punisher book, I did a pitch to take over, which I didn't get. I think it went to Chuck Dixon, who was already writing another Punisher book. I think that's where it went. Anyway, but that was one of the things I was trying to set up. That I wanted the commission to try to utilize Frank Castle for something. So yeah, that was the thing. But a lot of it came out of I used to be Mark Grunwald's assistant, and when Mark was writing Captain America, I was there during all the co-plotting sessions for the John Walker arc, where John Walker took over as Captain America for a while, along with Kieran Dwyer, who was a good buddy of mine at the time. So we all really enjoyed this John Walker Captain America arc because it was so different. And that was Grunwald's entire thing, was he thought he wanted to do this different version of Cap. And he was actually shocked that people really liked this other version of Cap, because he really had meant to show that this was a bad idea and then he would go away and that would be the end of it. But people liked it so much that when he finally brought Steve Rogers back, he put John Walker into the captain's uniform and just turned him into the US Agent, brand new character, which a lot of people really liked. John Byrne took him and used him in West Coast Avengers, I think.
Yep.
And because I was so familiar with the character, I was very eager to get to use him. And I would have liked to have written a lot more stuff with John Walker as well, because I really enjoyed that character. I tend to like characters that are a little darker and more gray, instead of like I hate Superman. I can't think of a more boring character to write. Who's he going to fight that you're not going to know, oh, he's going to win?
There's some truth to that. I think another thing about John Walker, you think about the time that he was created, very emblematic of that time. You think about the 80s, it's very big, it's boisterous, it's Hulk Hogan, it's Star Wars, both in the screen and in politics. It's the fall of the Soviet Union. You can't go wrong pairing a character like that with a character who's the personification of the 70s vigilante, the terrible New York. They seem like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. And everybody was like, oh, that's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? I'm like,
right. Well, they needed you. That's the thing. You're the genius.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's like when you're on staff, because you're working with all these characters all the time, you have a lot of ideas.
Right.
It's sad to say, but when you're on staff, you also have the opportunity to pitch ideas all the time. And because you're there, it's very convenient for editors to hire other editors to work on projects, because you're right there to change stuff. So as the pages were coming in, I could see the pages, and I had a better access to making sure that stuff got done properly. And Don, if he needed a change, he could just walk up the hall and say, I need this fixed, and I would just fix it right then. And a lot of creators got really irritated that a lot of us on staff kind of had the pick of projects. And I kind of felt bad about it, but I was happy to get work.
Right.
When I was on staff, I was paid less than the secretaries at Marvel. All of editorial was. So we were paid very badly, but we loved our jobs. That's why we were there. And after I left, they suddenly decided that they would pay the editors a little bit more money, and they let them get royalties on the books they worked on. I thought, well, you waited for me to leave? Because I made
they
a
were
lot
scared
more.
they'd have to pay out too many royalties to you. That's what it was. They go bankrupt.
Nothing that I actually edited made a lot of money. I didn't like those. I like to edit the books that they sold a decent amount, but they were not X-Men money. If you're editing the X-Men, you were going to make a pretty good amount of money. I just thought it was funny when I left. But I was making a lot more money doing freelance work part-time than I was on my staff job. And I was a greedy editor. I had 2 or 3 times the amount of books everybody else had, because I just couldn't stop generating projects that I was interested in working on. And various creators that, I have an opportunity to work with Cam Kennedy. I'm going to create a project so that I can work with Alan Grant and John Wagner and Cam Kennedy. And they just kept saying yes to everything I proposed. So I wound up with way too many projects. So I was kind of burning 3 or 4 candles at both ends for a while.
Well, when you're that young, you got the candles to burn.
That's right.
So
It's very different than it is now.
Right. Go ahead. I know you got another question, Darry.
I wanted to hit the third part of the triangle, as it were. Paladin is another one that I thought was a natural fit to go up against the Punisher, and the way he used him here I thought was great. But he's a character that I feel like there aren't as many over the top great stories as there could be with him. And I was wondering how he became involved in the story. Was it a character that you wanted to put in there? Was it a suggestion from someone else? Because again, it just feels so natural.
He's another character that, because I remember when I'm working with Mark Gruenwald, I worked on Marvel Universe. I got to know all these characters that you didn't see very often. And he was one of those characters that I liked his costume, and then I liked the idea of him, and I liked mercenaries. And I always liked the idea of having him say, "Have gun will travel," like
exactly.
Show.
The old callback.
And I just was like, I said, I thought, hey, this character would fit in here. And I also knew nobody was going to care what I did with him. That's one of those things when you choose to work with some characters that nobody's using, you have a lot more freedom. If I try to use Spider-Man, it was such a hassle, you just didn't want to bother. It's like Mark Gruenwald gave me his blessing to use US Agent. That meant I could do whatever I wanted with him because I knew what Mark would allow. And then I could use Paladin all I wanted, which I also brought him in when I was writing Silver Sable. I brought Paladin into there.
Another natural fit. And
Mark actually gave me Battlestar, as he was done with him. So he gave me Battlestar to use in the book. Myself and DG Chichester and a couple other people, we kind of created our own little mini universe where we would utilize all of each other's characters in whatever books we worked on, because there wasn't going to be this hassle of having to deal with a writer that didn't want you touching anything they're doing, John Byrne, or editors who were picky about what you did with their characters. I mean, they were very careful with the mutant characters, for example, and rightly so, because people would I wouldn't put Wolverine in my book because it'll help it sell. Yes, it will. But people were trying to they would do that with the Punisher. They would do it with Spider-Man. When Ghost Rider was this gigantic surprise hit, Ghost Rider was everywhere. And so you do have to be careful that you don't expose these characters. I didn't really like using a lot of those characters. I wanted to use characters that nobody cared about. And they also weren't looking, so I could get away with doing some things. Because I did several things in here that I was surprised that nobody blinked when I did them.
Yeah, but that's something that I thought about when we were reading this, and I've had this book since like 1992. I bought a long box of Punisher comics at one of the only comic book shows, I swear to God, they ever had in Arkansas. Comic books had just gotten to Arkansas like 10 minutes before I got into them. Yeah. But US Agent kills somebody, and he's a member of the Avengers at this point. That seems very incongruent with Avengers stuff, but it sounds like if Gruenwald approved it, you could just kind of do that. It's not like it's out of character for US Agent to kill somebody. He had killed the Watchdogs and stuff.
He decapitated somebody in Captain America.
Right. But it seems like at this point he would have been on better behavior as an Avenger. But it sounds like, you could get away with this. You had kind of tacit approval there.
Well, Gruenwald wrote, he was a piece of work because he kind of went crazy when he wasn't able to save his parents.
Right.
So he was still kind of suffering through that sort of post-traumatic stress syndrome thing, which is what made him more interesting, because you couldn't predict, because he was trying to be a hero, but he failed miserably as Cap, and he was trying, but it didn't always work. And once he gets near the Punisher didn't have a whole lot of trouble convincing him, hey, revenge, people's parents have gotten killed just like mine. It didn't take much to kind of push him
No, it didn't.
over the edge. But I actually had Gruenwald read what I was doing, because I didn't want to go farther than Gruenwald would let it go, but he was very happy with it. That felt good to me.
No, it's a great representation of the character, and I love to point this out. One of my favorite things about US Agent, the first time I ever saw him was in the 91 cards. That's what really bridged me from baseball cards into comic books. And I saw a picture of him, loved the costume, loved the name, was just an instant fan. But I didn't know, when you read about him, he's he kind of reminds people that everybody who would get superpowers, just like everybody you work with, everybody everybody doesn't fit neatly into this. These are the good guys, these are the bad guys.
Right.
he's on a good team, but do you really want to be his friend? Do you really want to hang out with this guy? But if he has your back, he has your back. And I think that can be a lot more, not that a character like Captain America isn't interesting, but this is a different shade of interesting.
Very different, yeah. Well, that's what made it interesting.
And also that's America. America's a lot of different things. And in their own way, US Agent and Captain America are both America.
What was interesting is when John Walker was Captain America, we weren't really supposed to show the politics of various characters or their religions at that point. We didn't. The goal was to not upset anybody. Right. Everybody could project whatever their own thinking is on it. But Mark
hard not to do politics in a character called Captain America, though.
Yeah, well, but it's American stuff. So you're not going to label him as conservative or liberal or whatever.
Right, for sure.
But with John Walker and Mark had this group called the Watchdogs, because we were very irritated with the moral majority at the time. The Watchdogs were the moral majority gone overboard, and they were actual terrorists. They weren't just people trying to put things the way they wanted. They were actual terrorists. That was the big difference. He put John Walker up against them, and then you find out John Walker's politics, he believes in a lot of the things that the Watchdogs are saying, but he sees that they're terrorists. He was conflicted because he's like, well, I kind of believe some of this, but what they're doing is killing people. But it was a conflict, and it was interesting because you don't see that with a character. Usually it's like, I don't believe you're wrong, and I'm going to fix this. And you got a little more meat to the character than Captain America would be like, no, they're just bad, and that's the end of that. Whereas right. John Walker could see where they were coming from. And that made it very interesting to read. And I thought it was interesting that Mark was able to write that character. If you're a writer, you want to write characters that are not like yourself. But it can be difficult to write a character that's very, very different, because John Walker couldn't be more different than Mark Grunwald. But you have to learn, how do I write this character? When did I go too far? How do I do this without? Again, we were trying desperately not to offend anybody. And we didn't really get anybody that was on one side of the aisle or the other that was upset with something that we did. That wasn't until I started writing Silver Sable and some people got a little bit irritated with me because I really pushed I pushed some buttons here and there.
Well, it happens, though. But you know who else is a big button pusher? Jesse. He's itching to push some buttons on a couple questions. I can tell. Look at him, dressed for success. I respect that.
That's right, baby. Yeah, I guess
first. My Punisher shirt tonight.
Yeah, what's going on here?
I still have my. We used to our softball team was called the Punishers.
Beautiful.
So I remember that.
It's like we had basically a shirt that had the Punisher symbol on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I still have it.
That's awesome. I used to keep up with the travails of the Punishers in the Bullpen Bulletins page or Marvel Age. I was very invested. I'm a big baseball fan, so.
It was the big DC Marvel slug out that was kind of fun.
Boy, I guess I'll throw a question out there about the villain of this piece. I guess the main villain. Clearly, the draw to this book is watching the three on the cover dance around for a little bit. But was there anything special about the villain other than just Vincent Mangiano being Vincent Mangiano, another target for the Punisher?
Well, again, in my own little universe, I liked the Maggia sort of crime family, and I was particularly interested in Silvermane. And if you read a bunch of my stuff, I did a Spider-Man Deathlock series called The Power of Terror, in which Silvermane basically decided what he wanted was to get Deathlock's body for himself. So I actually have used Silvermane. Again, it's part of my little, let me plant a few seeds here with this, and I can utilize these characters here. But other than that, the big thing was the three main characters kind of duking it out. And I wish that he was less of a sort of cipher generic bad guy, Maggia guy. There wasn't anything special about him. I think I killed him at the end.
Okay. Yeah, he's dead.
Pretty much everybody. A Punisher story is Punisher goes after somebody, they're dying. So
yes.
You make him as bad as you can so that when he dies, you go, yes, I'm glad to see you dead.
Okay.
If Frank Castle actually has any superpowers, like two of them, it's like he somehow never shoots anyone who doesn't deserve it. And also, if he decides you're going to die, you're going to die. And that's it. If he's got to go to space to do it, that's what he does.
Oh, I don't know. Have they done that? The Punisher in space?
There was a graphic novel around this time called G-Force, where he goes to the space station and has to kill it.
I might have.
You might have, actually.
There are so many projects I don't remember doing because I did so much stuff at one point.
Oh, for sure.
And I find stuff and I'm like, I can't believe I don't remember doing this.
Especially Punisher stuff. There's a lot of it. Like you said, you could
There
get
was
this
so
on
much.
the shelf. You could put a $5 price tag on it and it would sell. You could pitch it. And a lot of it winds up really fun read. But Jesse, you're asking questions and I'm being rude.
Oh, you're fine, buddy. I got these next few questions. They could be yes, no, quick, whatever you want to do here. But any real world influences make its way into the book that maybe some of us didn't catch?
I don't remember. I'm
That's
sure
fine.
there was. I was living in New York at the time. I don't remember if there was anything real world in there. The big thing was I really loved writing action scenes. There's a pretty neat. I wish it was drawn a little differently, but there's a really great fight scene on the train that goes over the bridge.
Right.
And I had actually gone out and taken pictures from areas I probably shouldn't have been for some of the reference for that. Location is actually a big part of a story.
For sure.
There's a lot of areas that I specifically sent reference to make it feel more real. You know, when you live in New York, you can just wander around and you can see it. When Frank Miller lived in New York, he used to climb up on the rooftops and he took all these reference pictures of the roofs. So when you see his Daredevil, it's very New York.
Wow.
You know, I mean, he understood the fire escapes. He even went to Coney Island. There's a Daredevil issue that takes place on the Cyclone roller coaster, and it's brilliantly drawn. It's like that. Really, he drew a roller coaster with Daredevil on fighting scene. I stole that when we did Deathlock in the second issue of the miniseries. And people were like, wow, where'd you come up with this idea? I said, I stole it from Frank Miller.
If you're going to steal from somebody. Yeah, there you go. If you're going to steal from somebody. Any subplots that didn't make it into the book? Anything out there that just kind of wasn't enough to make the cut or anything like that you can recall?
Not really, because I literally wrote this over the weekend. It was one of those projects you needed. It was everything that I wanted to do. I did in the book. If I'd had a little more space, some of the action scenes could have been a little more interesting. But we bashed that thing out so fast that not really. There was just stuff that I wanted to do more with the Punisher. I would have liked to have done more with John Walker. I did eventually do more with Paladin. I never picked up on the threads I dropped with Paladin because he didn't complete his mission. And how did he get his legs back from being broke? How did he get out of there? And the ending came too quick for me because nobody's going to be fooled into thinking the Punisher actually died at the end. But then when the little wrap up was that little tiny thing at the very bottom of the last page. I would have liked to have done a little more with that. So everything. That's one of the few times that everything I was being self-indulgent on actually got it into the book.
Nice.
You mentioned that you wrote the plot almost in a weekend, which again, that's amazing for how tight this is. But you did an amazing job at setting the Punisher and the villain really well at odds ideologically. You have all these great scenes of Frank talking to Micro as to why this is particularly bothering him. And it's like the Don, for lack of a better term, is killing his own. He's killing innocents. He's killing family members. And Frank's like, I don't do that. I did not want anyone who was innocent to suffer. And you do it right at the outset. And you really establish the character in his own right as a way of saying, like, yeah, he's a violent guy, but there's a reason for that and there are constraints for that. And I was just wondering, having done this so quickly, do you feel like you have a really good grasp on who Frank is? Were you trying to make a statement with that, or like where did that come from? Because it struck me as pitch perfect.
Well, I like the Punisher since, I when I first got to Marvel, I think they were finishing off the original Punisher miniseries that Stephen Grant did with Mike Zeck. And I absolutely loved that. And I probably read that thing, I don't know, 20, 30 times. I really felt that was a really good representation. And the thing is, the Punisher is a serial killer. You have to, he is going to sort of self-justify, but you have to kind of self-justify in print. Otherwise, it's a reprehensible thing, anything he does. It came from that. But I've been working on Punisher books for quite a while. I've been working on the Punisher War Journal, the Punisher War Zones. And I'm in the office, so I was at a lot of plot conferences. I'm always talking to Carl. I would talk to Mike Barron. I talked to Chuck Dixon. So I did have a very good grasp of who he was. But also, I kind of come from the Tom DeFalco school of tight stories. You have to justify what characters are doing. And especially when it's a one-shot, you have to pretend maybe nobody has ever read a Punisher story in their life. When they pick it up, it's the first time they read it, and you need to make it work for them without, hopefully, just sort of vomiting up exposition that sucks and is boring. And again, go back to Frank Miller. Marvel used to have at the top of all of their comics this little blurb that told you everything you needed to know about the character before you read the story. And Miller thought that was horrible. And he said, I can do all that in the story better. So they said, go ahead, try. And he did. He made it within a few pages. You knew who Daredevil was. You knew what was going on in the story. You didn't need that thing telling you this stuff anymore. He found a much more artistic and meaningful way to do it. And I always thought that was great. Like, that's what I was trying to do. I'm glad that what I was going for, you seem to get that. And that's terrific. Because sometimes you write it and people go, I don't know. So anytime somebody gets what you do, it's such a big deal.
For me, it seemed, I think, No Escape could be a movie, right? Like, I was hearing John Bernthal.
That'd be great. I might get a little money for that.
But that was a great act one of, hey, you might know who this character is, you probably do, but if you don't, this is what makes him different from the people he hunts, and that's very key. That's the crux of his entire thing. It was a pleasure to read. I've read it a few times since Dean, our fearless leader, suggested it, and it's just
cool.
It's been a great read. Thank you, as a longtime fan of Frank and all the other characters. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, I read it about once a year. So it comes back for me often. I love the Punisher. He's my favorite character. And it's funny to think about when you're young. I got into the Punisher in like 1990, 1989. And when you're young, you're like, hell yeah, kill those guys. Take care of that. Why doesn't Spider-Man just kill Dr. Octopus? Solve the problem. And then as you get older, you realize, well, you can't blow up a social relationship. Things are a lot more complicated. So why do you still like the Punisher? And one of the things that really comes through here in this story that I really like is for the Punisher, he's almost, I talked with Anna Cynthia about this once. He's almost so two-dimensional. He comes around to being three-dimensional because everything is just so neat. Everything is right, wrong, punishment. And if you juxtapose him with other characters, you will see this incredible growth because you make Frank have to make decisions about what he's going to do, whether it's tactical or morally. At one point, and even when he's made alliances, one of my favorite moments of the book is when US Agent saves the day, comes in and starts banging up on on Paladin, and Frank runs away. He's like, maybe they'll kill each other. That'll solve one of my problems. And I love that you got Punisher. To me, that is the Punisher. As I get older, I think that he's reprehensible. He solves no problems. Yeah. He actually arguably would exacerbate them in the real world. In the Marvel universe, there's apparently a big hype that just spits mooks out left and right. If somebody doesn't deal with this in New York City, I guess, whatever. But in the real world, he would make it worse. But that's the stuff you envy. He has taken a very complex situation for Paladin and US Agent, and for him it's just maybe they'll kill each other. Right.
Yeah, well, it's fun to write. That's fun when you have characters that are very different. It's so much more fun to write their dialogue. Jim Cameron, who did Terminator and Aliens, I loved the way the grunts in Aliens were not necessarily liking each other. They were very different characters, and the dialogue between them was so much fun, and it was so great. But at the end of the day, that they could work together to solve a problem so easily. But I always I want to have fun with the characters. I cast people as the characters I write, so it's easier to write their dialogue. I don't think I ever gave a cast somebody as Frank Castle, though. Although now I would use John Bernthal, he's really good. He may not be a big guy, but I buy him as the Punisher. And I liked Kurt Russell's son as U.S. Agent and the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Did a great job. I was very upset that they killed Battlestar, though. That I didn't. Yeah. Paladin, I forget who I had somebody in mind as Paladin. I can't remember who it was. There's somebody smarmy.
I was going to say it's a Weasley guy, right? Oh, somebody who's just like, but I love the little characterization he gets too. The whole top brand of cigarettes. This champagne sucks. I'm looking for the finer things here, brother.
I wanted to ask while I had you about Silver Sable and the Wild Pack.
Sure.
Because I love that book when I was a kid, and whenever I got a chance, I would get another issue. I'm a huge fan of the character. I like Spider-Man as much as Dean likes the Punisher. Seeing that character seeing that character on her own has always been a favorite of mine. And I was just curious, that book, female-led, spinning out of Spider-Man at the time it came out of, was it you? Did you have a love for the character? Was it something that someone asked you to do? I was curious if you could talk about the origins of that.
Well, that's another one of those funny stories. Marvel had decided they wanted to do a Silver Sable and the Wild Pack comic. So they had asked various people to do a pitch. And I always really liked the character. I loved when she first showed up when Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz created her. I liked the stuff that Dave Michelinie had done with her with Todd McFarlane, because I had colored a lot of those stories. So I was like, oh, I definitely want to do this book. But I thought the one thing I didn't like was that the Wild Pack was just a bunch of Star Trek red shirts that seemed to be there as cannon fodder. And I said, no, I'm going to make a bunch of characters. And I had created this character called Crippler in a Daredevil annual that I had actually pitched that as a series, but that was a little too much for Marvel. So I thought, well, I can bring him in. He would be a perfect character in there. And I thought, I want a whole bunch of characters that are dark and horrible. And the idea for me was that Silver Sable wanted to bring people, who she thought had potential and try to get them to see the light, as it were, while they were making money doing mercenary tasks. I did a pitch, and I kind of pitched it as a much darker book than it actually wound up being. Sort of wanted it to be like, imagine if Silver Sable was John McClane.
Okay.
And except for in a more of a noirish story. So I pitched it, and I thought I had a pretty good shot because I really liked my pitch. And then I was at San Diego, and 2 or 3 of us who had pitched for the book found out that the editor had hired a writer, and it wasn't any of us. And it was this guy named George Caragone. And George used to write He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. And George was somebody who was a friend of Jim Shooter's. And we were like, George, he's the worst writer we know. Why did he get the book? And what he had pitched was, it was a team-up book. Every single month, Silver Sable was going to team up with or go against some big Marvel character. Issue 1, the X-Men. Issue 2, Spider-Man, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I certainly didn't want to write a book like that. I kind of forgot about it.
They've canceled several books like that at that point.
Right. A few months go by, and I'd find out, Joe Quesada was originally tapped to draw the book with George. And I was like, wow, Joe will do a great job. And I was like, boy, Joe would be perfect on this book. Then I get this weird phone call one night, and they're like, are you still interested in Silver Sable? I'm like, yeah, why? He goes, can you write the first issue over the weekend? And I was like, well, what happened? And then apparently George had written 10 or 12 drafts of the first issue and driven everybody crazy, had driven Joe Quesada off the book. Then they hired Jay Lee. He drove Jay Lee off the book. Tom DeFalco finally said, fire this guy right now, because every time he does another one, it is pissing off the editors because of what he wants to do. Craig Anderson was the editor. He called me up.
We can't lose any more hot artists.
And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, I got to do it over the weekend. I'm like, crap. And he goes, but don't worry. I've got the first issue story for you. And I'm like, oh, God. Basically, DeFalco had said, show a training thing and then have her go rescue her niece at this private school where Spider-Man has to help her. And I'm like, well, this is my Die Hard story. So I just took that, and I had to use Spider-Man. And I went, okay, I'm going to start bringing my actual Wild Pack guys in. So the first guy I introduce, of course, is the bigoted racist piece of shit known as Powell. So that's the first guy I bring in. And I wrote it, and then I kind of had to figure out, and then I was like, well, who's drawing the book? Because in my head, I had Joe Quesada and some of that kind of stuff. And they told me this guy named Stephen Butler. And I'm like, Stephen Butler? Who's Stephen Butler? Oddly, I had colored Stephen on something and didn't know who it was him. And he goes, oh, he's like Jim Lee crossed with Mark Bagley. And I went, that's interesting. And that's a pretty accurate description. He's a very Spider-Man-y artist. They sent me this stuff, and I went, okay, this stuff's not going to be very dark. So I'm going to have to make this a little less dark than I wanted. But I wrote him a big letter and saying, okay, she's not to be a fuck puppet. We're not going to be drawing this book where all I see are ass shots and cleavage. I said, she's in a tight outfit. No matter what you draw, she's going to look hot. But I don't want any of these intentional things. That's not what she's doing. I said, when there's a story where she's supposed to be sexy, you can go for it. And I said, not only that, but all these characters, I'm going to give you body descriptions because I don't want everybody looking the same. Because Crippler was supposed to be more like a wrestler body. And Powell was supposed to be more like a pretty boy with that big V back and stuff. And Stephen was fantastic to work with. I gave him way too much to draw every issue, and he just nailed it every single time. I'm just an amazing collaborator. So that's how I wound up on the book. I wanted the book. But again, at the very last second, I came in, and I was very happy. Tom DeFalco loved what I was doing because I basically rethought the character completely and gave her a history that they never gave him. And Tom loved everything I did up until I did an abortion story. And then he said, wait a minute, what are you doing? And I said, trust me. And he did. I don't know why. And Mark Grunwald used to say that was the first book he would pull to read out of because we used to get a pile of comics every week, and he would pull that one first. And I was like, wow, that's a big compliment. I mean, I thought it was a fun book, but yeah, so that was cool. And it sold really well. And then as it dribbled down, but there was this usual group of people that kept writing letters. If you wrote a letter, you're probably going to get it in the letters page. But it was interesting because when I did the abortion story, everybody freaked out and they're like, please don't make her get an abortion, please. I'm like, well, she's not going to have a baby, that's for sure.
Right.
Because the whole point of that story was, and again, this is me using my own sort of politics. I'm very pro-choice, which does not make me pro-abortion. And I said, what if it was the other way? What if she was forced to have an abortion? So that's how the story begins, with the doctor basically saying, oh, we've scheduled you for an abortion because you're pregnant. And she loses her mind because you're not going to tell Silver Sable what to do. So I got to do a couple issues of her really thinking about what would it be like to be a mom, which let me do the history of her mother and what that meant to her, which helped to flesh her out. But when Tom got wind of it, he was like, wait a minute. She can't have, because he said, Susan Storm had a miscarriage and that went very badly for us. I said, that's not going to happen. He goes, well, you can't have an abortion. I said, she's not going to have an abortion. He goes, well, what are you doing? I said, don't worry, trust me. And it wound up it was a false pregnancy, which was kind of a cop-out, but I knew they would never let me do anything else. But I got to do the story that I wanted, which was having her make a decision, thinking about it, because she knew she couldn't be a mother, but at this other part of her really wanted to be. By the end of the book, she kind of quit being Silver Sable. And had the book gone on, she would have got back into it. But that was like the story there that I had hoped to explore that, because I thought if you're going to do a book with a female lead, you should really explore some issues that are more female-centric. I did a lot of talking to a lot of women to get their perspective, because I don't know what it would feel like to be pregnant and have to make that decision. So that was kind of interesting to do that. And then somebody says, well, how can you write a female character? I said, well, I'm also not an assassin. It's like, how do you write the Punisher? Well, I'm not a murderer that goes around killing people. I'm not a cyborg. Anybody can write it. You do your homework. You do your research. You talk to people that might know something you don't know. And if you're lucky, you have an editor that understands the character, which I didn't necessarily all the time. But when I did, like Mark Grunwald was a wonderful editor. And Ralph Macchio, whenever I got to write Daredevil for him, he knew the character so well that he would make me write a much better story than my first draft. That was always a pleasure. But some other people, they let me do whatever I wanted in Silver Sables. There's a lot of self-indulgences that when I read it now, I go, oh, they shouldn't have let me do that. Oh, I'm letting the Wild Pack run the book, because they were much more interesting to me half the time. So yeah, another book that I pitched for that, and I got it, but I got it like I was number 2.
It's interesting to hear that the Wild Pack was kind of the Justice League of Gregory Wright. I like that the Crippler pitch didn't take, so he's going to be a member of there. I loved him. I was sending pictures to our group chat earlier today of that character. He just hit at the right time. But I was really interested in Battlestar, because I'm a huge Mark Gruenwald fan.
Yeah, me too.
To an embarrassing degree, and it's interesting having worked with him, and you got the sign off for US Agent. I'm just curious, how did that happen? Did you go to him and say, hey, if you're not using Lamar, can I borrow him? I got an idea for this. Or was Gru like, hey?
That was exactly what I did. I went to him, and he was thrilled, because he just didn't have any more stories with him. So he was thrilled that I wanted to use this character. And I told him, I said, well, I like that he hasn't been around. I said, he's basically unemployed. He's looking for a job. And he's desperate. His tryout basically was him jumping out of the fucking plane with no parachute to save the Wild Pack. Plus, I needed a black character to because of the racist that was going to constantly be saving his butt, so that he would eventually come around a little bit. But I had so much fun with Battlestar, because very quickly I was like, oh, this guy should actually be the team leader, because he wants to be like Captain America. At one point, I got to do a story. Mark and I used to try to do. Mark would call me up and says, "Oh, there's a problem with these books. Can we write a crossover to fix this continuity?" And I was like, yes, absolutely. That would be cool. I got to do a crossover with Captain America in Silver Sables. I got to use Battlestar and the real Captain America together. And again, it meant having a nice lunch with Mark. So we sat down and discussed what I could do. And Mark was very generous. Unless you were going to do something really horrifying, he would let you run with it. And he was excited for any new idea that he didn't have. which was kind of a fun thing. Well, if you're a Battlestar fan, I don't know if you know this story. The original Battlestar was originally called Bucky. And at the time, I had gotten my good buddy Dwayne McDuffie a job at Marvel. And Dwayne came to me and he said,
"Wait, you are responsible for Dwayne McDuffie working at Marvel?"
Yeah, well, Dwayne was my RA in college. We had become good friends. And while I was at Marvel, the first story that I wrote for Mark Grunwald in Solo Avengers was this Black Knight story. And I just couldn't get it right. I finally said, Dwayne and I had been working on a screenplay together. I said, "You want to write a comic story with me? And maybe I'm having trouble with it." So he said, yeah, that'd be cool. So Dwayne and I co-wrote the first story we ever sold, which was this Black Knight story that I got this kind of decent artist named Alan Davis to draw. And then we wrote a Wonder Man story after that. We were kind of a team of writers, and we created the new Deathlock together. But at one point, Bob Budiansky needed a new assistant, and I said to Dwayne, "Would you be interested in working at Marvel?" And I just kind of opened the door, and Bob had already made a decision. He was hiring somebody else. But I said, "You should just talk to Dwayne and see what." And after about 20 minutes of talking to Dwayne, Bob was now hiring Dwayne. Yes, I helped Dwayne get into Marvel. He comes to me one day, he goes, "I think your boss is racist." And I went, "What? What are you talking about?" And he goes, "You can't call the black character Bucky." And I was like, "Why not?" I really didn't understand. So he explained it to me and I went, "Oh." I said, "You need to tell Mark." And he goes, "Oh my God, I couldn't." I said, "No, he's unaware, just like I was unaware of what the problem is." He goes, "But I couldn't tell him." I said, "Well, I can't explain it to him." I said, "You got to explain it to him." So I dragged him into the office and I said, "Mark," I said, "there's a little problem with Bucky." And he said, I need Dwayne to explain. He goes, "Oh, okay." So Dwayne explained the problem very tactfully. And I swear to God, Mark turned green and white. And he was so horrified because his entire reason that he chose the black of one of the Buckies that was part of the Super Pager group was he wanted to have a good black character in the Marvel Universe because we didn't have enough. And instead it was sort of backfiring into being this thing. And he goes, "Oh my God." And it was already in print as Bucky. "What am I going to do?" And he basically sat down with Dwayne, and Dwayne explained how to fix it. And Kieran Dwyer came in the office, and he was thrilled because he got to draw a new costume. And I think Kieran might have come up with the new name Battlestar. Between Mark and Dwayne and Kieran Dwyer, they came up with the new version Battlestar. And Dwayne kind of wrote the dialogue in the scene where another black character basically pulls Lamar aside and says, "Dude, why are you letting some white man call you Bucky?" And again, it was like he was unaware of the issue, and he was like, "Oh, that's not good." That's how that sort of happened. And Battlestar is a much cooler name, and it made him a much better character. It was a much better costume and everything. But yeah, it was just one of those funny. So then, because of that, Dwayne became Mark's go-to guy for any problematic anything. Because when we had gotten rid of Monica Rambeau, Captain Marvel, in the Avengers, because she just really it wasn't the right character for the leader. But we liked the character. We were trying to resurrect her and give her own books. We hired Dwayne to write this character and actually give her more history and roots than she had before. He gave her the proper roots from New Orleans and all that, but the book didn't. Despite I got Mark Bright to draw the book, and I thought it was brilliant. It did not take off. But yeah,
I did buy it on the rack for whatever that's worth.
Wound up having a lot of good intent, and I got to use that, and I used that in books every once in a while because I had somebody yell at Battlestar and say, "You let some white boy call you Bucky," blah 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 blah. Because it makes it a little more interesting to have these little conflicts that we've all said stupid things in our lives and been called on the carpet for it. And it makes us a little better for learning when we're wrong. Not that we're ever wrong, but yeah. But it made it a lot more interesting. And Dwayne made me a much better writer because I was always really good at thinking up action scenes. But Dwayne was always like, there's got to be meat behind it. You really got to think, why is this character doing what they're doing, and make them not ciphers. Because a lot of characters, it's like, could be how many books came out and you're like, well, this book is just another version of how many versions of the Punisher have we seen? And you go back to, there's something about the Frank Castle version that it resonates because he's not killing good guys ever. He's killing people that kind of deserve to die. And that's the thing. We want some of these people taken out of society. And since the law doesn't always do it for us, we go, well, we've got Frank Castle.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard about the Bucky thing before, and yeah, you look at people's backgrounds. I grew up in the South, so I was well aware that this was not a term that you could utilize,
right?
You know, for a black man, because we had Arkansas history, and you learned about like, slave auctions and things like that. But Mark Gruwald's from Wisconsin, where you probably didn't learn this. This wasn't you wouldn't be as acutely aware of this term, particularly if it had been utilized before for arguably the greatest Marvel Universe hero's sidekick.
Right, and that was the whole point, because the Super Patriot had called his little group of guys the Buckies. He was just literally playing off of that and just no awareness of it. And then it was funny because the other two Buckies became bad guys called Left Winger and Right Winger.
I've seen those guys in the Marvel Universe Ohatmu, pretty much. They're the official handbook. And I was like, I've never read anything with them in it, but I couldn't believe they existed, which is pretty crazy. Well,
they were only in it a couple things, but if you read Mark's run when John Walker was Captain America, they showed up in that. Funny, I reread that run recently, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I really liked it so much because I was there while it was being done, and some of my input is in the book, or if it is that good. But I really enjoyed Mark's run on Captain America, and Mark was a good friend, and every time somebody says, oh, I'm a big Mark Gruenwald fan, I love that because he was the guy you wanted him to be. He was the heart and soul of Marvel Comics. He made Marvel fun, and he certainly loved pranks more than any human on the planet. And he made sure that people pranked me really good. So,
well, you're a better person for it, right?
If I would dish it out, if you're going to dish it out, you better be able to take it.
Right. No, that's for sure.
Is there, I don't know how many modern comics you read, but Silver Sable recently returned in a book called Uncanny Spider-Man, and I loved it, but I'm just curious, did you read it? Do you have any opinions on the book itself?
I didn't know she came back. I haven't read it. They did a Silver Sable #1 special thing at one point, then I was pissed off that they didn't call me. Sometimes when you're done with a character, you really don't want to read what somebody else does in case they ruin it.
Right.
But they're not your characters. So it's like you when you're doing them, they feel like they're yours, but they're not. They belong to a company, and if the company wants to kill them, they can just kill them off. But it's comics, so people get resurrected. What was it in? What was the name of the book?
It was it was Uncanny Spider-Man.
Yeah.
By Cy Spurrier, and it came out at the end of last year.
I'm gonna have to look it up because now I want to see what they did. I did get to do, when I was writing the book, Danny Fingeroth was the editor of Spider-Man, and he was incensed that we had possession of Sandman. So
but
second that the book got
established before you took
over
the book,
Sandman back and turned him into villain, but they never explained why. And that drove me nuts. One of the last stories I ever wrote was I wrote that story, which was a Silver Sable story where she goes to stop a robbery and it's Sandman, and they have that conversation. Basically, she had broken his heart. He decided that maybe it was better to be bad. So he'd been trying to be good for so long, I think, because he had a crush on her. But it was nice to kind of go back and do a story. And when I wrote it, I was like, man, I'd figured out so many more cool things to do with Sandman with his powers rather than him just oozing around and doing stuff. It was in its Spider-Man annual. I can't remember which one it was, but I had him do all these cool things. He figured out how to turn his sand into mirrors and do all kind of fun stuff with that. I got to finish off a piece of history that I didn't like that Danny just took him back and Danny also hated Hammerhead, and he wouldn't let me use him in some story. And then I was able to use Hammerhead. I think I used him in Silver Sable where Danny couldn't do anything. And I decided that he was Edgar G. Robinson. If you ever find the Silver Sable stories that have Hammerhead in them, and you'll if you read it, you'll go, oh, he's doing, see that.
That is how I view Hammerhead since then. So
yeah, but if you read it, you'll go, oh, he did do that on purpose. And if you read Crippler, you should read him in Andrew Dice Clay's voice.
All right.
Oh,
really?
Okay.
I was not expecting you to say that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, people say, well, Crippler is really Greg. And I'm like, oh, man. He was a nastier character before I put him in Silver Sable. I sort of split him in half and gave half of his terribleness to Powell because I decided I really liked Crippler.
Well,
But another character Marvel wasn't quite ready for.
I was going to say that it wasn't Sandman being with Silver Sable. Doesn't that predate your book?
Yeah, well, she used to hire anybody.
Right, because I swear it was
before,
in Solo Avengers and stuff. They had done a couple stories like that.
Yeah, well, she'd hired Spider-Man, she'd hired Sandman, she'd hired bad guys to take care of various things, and that was part of what I needed to kind of work that out, because she had to be more than just a psycho bitch on wheels.
Right.
I know how she was written. It's like the Peter David brought the Foreigner into that, and the Foreigner basically is Patrick McGowan from The Prisoner, whatever. But that was fun. It's like I had to come up with this history of why are they trying to kill each other exactly, but they're not really.
No, you did a great job with it. But yeah, the Sandman's heel turn, or when he goes back bad, that's one of my biggest regrets. I love good guy Sandman.
Yeah, I did too. I thought he was a lot more fun. It's like, and we were supposed to do an Intruders book, which was Sandman and Paladin and Finn and Lightbright. I actually did a whole podcast with somebody on this character Lightbright. That when I took Silver Sable to Somalia and I needed a bunch of characters, and I just sort of randomly came up with a bunch, and then Stephen Butler drew one character, this character Lightbright, and I went, oh, that's a really good character. Let me utilize this character a little bit more, because she was really good visually. And there's a whole bunch of people like that character so much. I went to a convention and I saw like hundreds of drawings of Lightbright, and I was like, oh my God. They're like, how did you think? I said, it was a throwaway character that the artist did a great job. And I said, well, I'd like to continue to use this character. And she was meant to go off into this other book. But then when they decided that books that weren't selling a certain number were going to be canceled, they decided no more Silver Sable spinoff, because it was ready to go. And then they canceled that book on me. But they would love to have the sales of the books they canceled on me.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Because they were still selling like 40,000 copies. And they would love to have those numbers today. And I think, gee, I wonder if those books would sell that today, or they wouldn't.
Right.
It looks like they would. You look at what they've done. They've gotten Ron Mars to come back and do Warlock and Silver Surfer. They do a lot. There's a new Danny Ketch Ghost Rider. They've gone very old school lately. Those books can sell 50K.
My best friend's D.G. Chichester, who got me into Marvel. They asked him to come back and do Black Armor.
I just bought the first couple issues of Black Armor.
He never called that armor. He just decided this will be great, and he ran with it, and he did a great job. It sort of picks up. It's a retro series. It picks up when Daredevil still has the armor, and it tells another story. And if you get a chance, you should pick it up. It's really well done. The artist that did it just kicked ass on it. I hope they get Scott McDaniel to come back, but they got this guy, I can't remember his name, something Neff. Look it up. But it's a great series. I mean, maybe that's because he's my friend and I liked his run on Daredevil, but it's a wonderful story. I keep hoping they'll let me come back and do, there's a Deathlock story I'd like to do. Dwayne wrote a story, and now Deathlock can turn back into Michael Collins at will, but he didn't actually show it. The story of why we never saw. So I kind of would like to go back and write that story.
I know we'd like to see it.
I'd love to do it with Dennis Cowan, because I didn't get to do enough with Dennis Cowan before we had different artists on the book at the time. I'd love to go back and do that story with Dennis. That would be fun.
I know we'd love to see it.
All right, I got a question. What's your favorite thing to cook?
Me? Oh, that's a great question. I'll start. I learned how to do. It ain't that spectacular, because I'm not posting pictures on Facebook. I'll tell you that much. I learned how to cook some ribs in the Instapot a while back, and I'll do that and chili. It seems like I could never get chili wrong, but I'll make it 5 different ways, and it's always good. So
yeah,
there you go.
Everybody thinks their chili's the best, which I find it hilarious.
Right.
I have an Instapot, but before I had the Instapot, I always used a pressure cooker. And the funniest thing is you can actually make really good ribs in the damn thing. And because I'm a big, I like to smoke it all low and slow, just like they do the real barbecue down south. But I'll be damned if you can't put them in an Instapot and make, they're not smoky, but they come out great. It's so bizarre, but yeah.
Yeah, it goes to the Instapot for a little bit, and I take it out and I throw it into the oven for a little bit to then glaze it with some stuff, and then bring one out, and the kids will eat it. So I guess I'm winning.
As long as you don't boil them.
Yeah.
I can make meatloaf and mashed potatoes. That's probably my favorite thing to make. Right? I can't cook very well, but I can make this, and everyone seems to like it.
Because meatloaf it's one of those things that nobody wants to show off pictures. Everybody loves meatloaf.
I think so. It doesn't look good, but it's delicious, and it goes well with mashed potatoes.
My favorite thing about meatloaf is the next day getting a big thick slice of it and having a meatloaf sandwich.
Right.
Absolutely. I enjoy leftover meatloaf too. It's I don't know. I like it, and I've made it a few times. I need to make it more, but that's probably the best thing I cook.
I can't cook, so I apologize. I've never.
Well, I can barely cook. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Everybody can cook. You just got to find something that you like to eat.
Right.
Everybody can make tacos. Tacos are the best thing ever. Any meat you have, you cook it, you spice it, you throw it into either a hard taco shell, a soft taco shell, top it with whatever cheese you like and some kind of slaw, and it's heaven.
All right.
We have a great New
My wife
England
actually
taco
made
festival
the
here.
taco out of meatloaf when she wanted a taco. She took some meatloaf that was in the fridge and some cheese, and she made herself a taco. And I was like, huh.
All right.
She's a genius.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
She's a genius.
Yeah, I only post the pictures of stuff that actually comes out good. I don't post the Kraft macaroni and cheese and the chicken breast that I threw lemon pepper on and tossed into the.
For the longest time, I was following everybody's saga of the sourdough. Everybody was doing these sourdough starters, and I was like, what is this trend? What is going on here?
Well, it was during COVID. Everybody had time to kill.
That's true.
And once you get a sourdough starter going, making sourdough bread is actually very easy, and it's tasty. But it was like it's a challenge to sometimes get the starter working.
Right.
I did it as well. I've been baking bread forever, but I never really got a starter going. So finally got my starter going, and now about once or twice a week I make a loaf of bread. But it's funny. But you have to feed the starter. But again, nobody had anything else to do, so everybody's posting their results. And you know what? Well, once you make something and it's good, right, you tend to stick with it. But during COVID, people actually had time to learn to do something. I played around with the sourdough bread. I was actually working with Graham Nolan on a project. Well, it didn't affect most of us who work freelance at work. We're used to working at home anyway.
Right.
And I cooked a lot of things. I'm also a home brewer. I brew beer. I brewed a lot of beer. And in our beer club, what was funny is our beer club, normally we pour at charity events so that other people can drink the beer because we can't sell it. But we did for Christmas, we did an Advent beer calendar. We had 24 brewers brew beer, and then we each got a case of 24 different beers, and we would get on Zoom every night and drink one of the beers and rip it apart. But it was nice because you got to try 24 different beers from people in the club, and we don't usually get to do that because we used to do bottle shares, and they kind of devolved into a meeting at a local brew club where we just buy beer and drink it, and so we're not really trying each other's beer as much. That was a lot of fun, but I brewed some weird stuff.
Well, COVID made us all even if we didn't literally brew anything weird, we were all brewing up on something weird because it was just so decidedly different.
I'll go ahead and close up shop here. I just figured it out, man. We talked Spider-Man number 14, I think it was. Spider-Man 14, I'm pretty sure.
What happened in that issue?
The big significance was the black costume came back for a quick second. McFarlane did that
was that Morbius issue.
Yes.
That was so much fun. That's one of my favorite ones. It was so much fun to color the black costume again.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun to color Morbius, which I wound up coloring when they did the Midnight Suns. And then I wound up writing it for a while until I said I didn't get to write a single story I meant to write.
Oh.
They wanted to do crossover after crossover after crossover with it, and it wasn't the editor's fault. It just happened that way. Right. And I said, this is not the book we talked about writing. I left, and then the book, I think it lasted 3 more issues before it got canceled. And I just did a whole bunch of nasty stuff in there. But I tell you, I was not nice to my characters that I wrote. I don't know what was the matter with me back then. But it was like, well, how dark can I get? What can I get away with?
Pushing that envelope.
It was fun, but now I try to be a little more. If I write something now, it'll be a lot more grown up.
I get it.
Now I just want to be able to be Howard Chaykin. That's who I want. He's writing the stuff I want to do.
Do you mean like Hey Kids comics?
Oh, that was brilliant. Yeah.
Okay.
That was brilliant. And the Times Squared book is about to come out again. And I got a preview copy of that. And that's just brilliant. And this new thing he's working on, this Western Fargo, that looks amazing. But I also really loved the Divided States of Hysteria. I thought I thought it was brilliant, and some people kind of criticized it without ever reading it, which I was very distasteful. I gave it to my 16-year-old to read to see what she thought of it, and she thought it was brilliant. She understood, she got it, she understood who the hero was. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, I've been friends with Howard forever. I love his work. He found his niche of what he wants to write, and not everybody gets to do the books they really want to do. I wrote stuff at Marvel that I wrote it because I had the opportunity to write it, but it wasn't something I necessarily wanted to do. I colored a lot of books I didn't really want to color, but they paid me very well, and it allowed me to work on a book like Starman, which paid me almost nothing. But I absolutely loved working on Starman. This book over here that maybe I didn't like, but paid me really well, kind of balanced out me being able to work on a book like Starman or a book like Fool Killer, which I loved.
With Gerber. Gerber's Fool Killer.
Paid me less. Yeah, Steve Gerber, unbelievable. You sort of have these trade-offs in order to make a living. And people's like, I don't understand. Why are you working for DC? They pay you so much less. So you really don't understand what it is those of us that do this do it for.
Fool Killer is another one of those books where whenever I get the opportunity, I'm just trying to recommend it to people. I'll happily lend out my issues. I'm like, this is
I
the
wish
best.
They would collect that. I would love to have a collected edition. I get a kick out of every time they collect stuff that's got my stuff in it. I have my little shelf of everything that I've gotten to do, and I wish they would collect Silver Sable. I wish they'd collect the rest of Deathlock. Yeah. I don't care if they ever collect the Morbius stuff.
Well, Morbius got a movie. You probably get a nice chunk of that if that's in your arrangements. So, no.
I didn't create it. I've never gotten. I got money when they made some posters and cards. I had a toy. But other than that, I got to thank you on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for their name, for the use of the company Cybertech, which I came up with.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they based the Deathlock that's in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on the Deathlock that Dwayne McDuffie and I did. Yeah. And I talked to the actor that played that guy, and he had said, oh, yeah. I said, that's what they gave me to read. And he goes, oh, I loved all that kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. Because you wonder, after you write it, does anybody ever look at it again?
Right.
But they didn't do it. They didn't use our names. They didn't use anything, so they didn't have to pay us anything.
Yeah. Did you know that was coming? Because I remember watching that season, and they don't refer to the character as Deathlock until
I didn't know until a couple weeks before when stuff on the internet started happening. Because they used to contact me on the video games. I had to create a lot of histories of characters that I created that was not in the comics for the video games. That was a weird thing to sit there and here's their measurements and here's how much they could lift. This other piece of history that is part of it, and they paid me a pittance to do it, but it's sort of fun, and I was like, they could at least send me a copy of the video game.
Yeah, right.
Funny enough, before Image got started, one of the things that used to tick off Jim Lee was he would see all this stuff with his artwork with his signature on it that Marvel was selling. And the main thing that he wanted was a fucking t-shirt. If they're going to use his art, the least they could do is just send, he wasn't really thinking in terms of, hey, they should have paid me all this extra money. He just wanted a t-shirt. But that really stuck with him that they didn't bother to do that. And I never got stuff that I might have had something to do with. They didn't even different departments. It didn't occur to them. But when you're a creator, if they make a piggy bank of your character and they send it to you, even though you think it's stupid, it makes you feel good. DC is actually really good for me. Every single thing of mine they ever reprint, they send me a couple copies of it. They've reprinted the Nightwing Year One so many times that I've got every format that ever existed of that and multiple copies of that. 0 Hour, same thing. And the 0 Hour was like this tome this thick.
Yeah, that's massive.
But they've always been really good about sending me this stuff. So I'm like, that's really cool because I like to have a copy of what I've done.
Right.
It's like pulling teeth sometimes.
I'm looking at, I was just thinking about the Jim Lee thing because I can remember going into an arcade and seeing, you mentioned video games. I can remember seeing X-Men Children of the Atom, and on the side of it was Magneto. That was straight up Jim Lee.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Marvel, they can, once they pay you for the production, they can use it wherever they want.
Right.
But at least tell somebody, or they're not going to send them a pinball machine, I don't think. But it's like at Marvel Islands of Adventure, the giant superheroes, I think they were done by Jim.
Wow.
maybe. But Paul Mounts, actually, the original ones were colored by Paul Mounts on a blue line, painted, and then they blew them up. And then they redid them with, I think, other color. But I don't know. Paul might have redone that. It's funny where some of these little things pop up. Like there's all these T-shirts that have covers that I colored that I didn't.
Right.
That stuff.
See that out there in the wild, and you're like, what in the world?
No, I think it's fun and cool. It's like, I know I'm not getting the money. I from being on staff, you know what the deal is. You do your work, you get paid for it, and they can do whatever they want with it forevermore. The only thing that you get is you get money for reprints. They've gotten a little better. It's like every time they reprint it, they seem to give me a little money. But it used to be one-time reprint fee for what you did. But a colorist didn't used to get anything. It was only if you were the writer, the penciler, or the inker.
Wow.
Letterer never got anything, and the colorist never got anything. But I signed contracts for stuff now, or at the end, that it was just more fair. But I don't think letterers, unless some creators created contracts that let the letterers get paid royalties. But like Chaykin is a great example. He and Ken Bruzenak have been partners forever. A lot of the look of the books that Chaykin does is because of Bruzenak, and that's why he works with him. And Chaykin and Simonson will both tell you that the lettering is every bit as important as everything else in the book. But a lot of pencilers, and they don't see it that way. They're just, we can put any lettering, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, hey, I want to tell you, I appreciate you so much coming on here and discussing, like Dean said, you got to discuss Punisher No Escape with us. We got into so much more Marvel history and other comic books as well. Do you have any projects going on right now that you'd love to plug?
I just finished. It's I don't know if it's shipped yet or not. I think it has the Ghosts of Matacumba Key, which was an independent comic done by Graham Nolan, and it takes place in Matacumba Key down there in Florida. And it's a really cool, intriguing mystery and ghost story and everything. So I finished that. So that should be shipping anytime soon. And then he and I will be doing the third part of his Monster Island trilogy. We're doing that, and people keep wanting me to turn up my little essays that I write about true tales as a book. That may happen. I have to go back in and rewrite some of those things, and because some of the comments that I get back add so much to some of these stories that I bring up. And I started writing them because there's a lot of so-called expert fans and expert historians that are completely full of shit. And they say stuff. It's like, no, that's not what happened. None of this stuff is. And Rob Liefeld actually has been doing a great job. If you've ever listened to his Robservations, he's at the time period he talks about where I was at Marvel, he's dead on accurate. And he's got the proof. And I backed him up on several things. And somebody had posted something somewhere along the line that, Mark Grunwald died because he read Rob Liefeld's Heroes Reborn. It's like, okay, that's a horrible thing to say in regards to my dear friend Mark. It's a terrible thing to say about Rob's work because Mark Grunwald discovered Rob Liefeld at a convention. He was a very big supporter of Rob. I don't know what he thought of Heroes Reborn, but he most certainly did not read that and get upset and die.
Right.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I made sure I posted a thing about that with Rob. And it's like when Rob brought that up, I was like, man, I remember that. That was just, what kind of a sick idiot brings that kind of stuff up? Mark was more disappointed that when the Marvolution happened and they purged so many people from staff twice, that upset him. And then when the executives decided that if you worked on staff, you could no longer write books for Marvel. And Mark loved writing stories for Marvel. That bothered him. But what somebody else did with the character.
Right. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there. And I would love to see those posts that you make in some kind of written form, or at least somehow it's recorded on Facebook. But my goodness, there's a wealth of information and fun stories to be had there.
Well, what I really like to do is I like to get a few people to draw like cartoons for each one of the
that'd be great. That would be great.
There are still people that are around that can do that were there, that could do some of the, because I used to do that in the comics that I edited. I would do a little tiny comic strip, usually just mocking myself. And I had Steve Buccellato did some of them. I had Rick Parker did one that was really, he actually gifted it to me. But it's funny, in the comic book, it's about this big, but Rick drew, it was like the size of a double page spread, And I was like, dude, I meant just this little, and I paid him for it, but I was like, guy, I'm looking for little things. It was like, I would ask them, oh, could I have a little sketch? And what I meant was dash off this 2-minute sketch and they would lose their minds. And Sandy Plunkett, he just couldn't manage to make a sketch. So he asked me if it was okay if he gave me a page of his art. And I was like, yeah, that's great. But I just really wanted a little sketch. This is way more than I deserved. I wasn't trying to make a big deal of it. But he gave me this gorgeous page that Scott Hampton had inked from this Black Panther story that he wrote and drew and colored. And it's a treasured piece of stuff. But I was like, it's so funny because some people can just whip out a drawing like nothing. And some people, like, they just can't.
Right.
Don Heck just sat down and whipped me out of Thor one day for fun. And I was like, that's awesome.
No kidding.
Like, I'll take that. But the amount of sketches I threw, because we used to get cover sketches from artists for covers, and they would just be thrown out.
Oh.
And I'm going to make this more painful. And John Romita would do cover sketches for us frequently.
No.
And they just,
oh,
I'm sure some people kept some of them, but I go, the amount of stuff that now you would just kill to have.
No kidding.
It's amazing. Rob Liefeld has kept almost everything he's ever done. So he's got all this stuff. He was smart. He sent Xeroxes of things or kept Xeroxes of everything. Like when he posts stuff, it's a treasure trove of, because I remember seeing a lot of that stuff when Rob first came to Marvel, because I hired him. I gave him the Zodiac characters to draw, because we didn't have a story. When he tells a story, Mark Rummel promised me this Black Panther story. There was no Black Panther story. My task was to find something for Rob to keep him at Marvel, because Mark wanted him at Marvel. And then I got him the 10 figures or something. And then I think DC offered him Warlord. And he said, what do I do? And I said, you take what somebody offers you. I said, I'm going to look for stuff for you, but don't wait. It could take me forever. Who knows when I'll have something. Take the offer. So he took it, and then he did Hawk and Dove, and then he came back to Marvel. And the next thing you know, he was offered when he tells the story, everybody offered him a book. Everybody offered him a book to write, to pencil. It was insane. And Mark Gruenwald was the one that said, take the New Mutants.
Wow.
He told him and so that's why Rob took it, because Mark said, this is where you're going to make your mark. And that's exactly what he did.
He did. He really did. Well,
it was fun. It was a fun time. It was funny to be at Marvel at a time when so many historical things were happening.
Really? That's the truth, man. We celebrate the 90s here on this podcast and all the stuff that happened in comics during the 90s. But my goodness, it is one of the decades where so much occurred. And just like you said, it's almost like every year there was something else happening.
Oh, yeah.
And well, again, like I said, thank you very much for coming on here.
Oh, anytime.
Look forward. Hopefully at some point we'll have something else to bring you back on and talk about. We got to talk about the Punisher tonight. We got to talk to Gregory Wright. I'm so excited. Thank you very much. So
thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, for Dean Compton, for Darry Waite, and for Gregory Wright, I'm Jesse Starcher. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.